So as many of you know, based on my channel name, I am an engineer. Specifically, I am an engineering consultant, which basically means that I help clients solve problems that they might not necessarily have the expertise to solve. You can find consulting in pretty much every field out there, whether it is engineering, business development, or even some form of the arts. And due to the older generation retiring and a loss of knowledge happening in the workforce, it's becoming more and more popular for young people such as myself to join the workforce as a consultant. So in today's video, I'm going to go over what I personally learned in my first full year as an engineering consultant. And stick around to the end because I'm going to say a few words and thoughts on whether or not this type of position may be for you. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Tyler Warlow and I go by The Mengineer, and I make videos on how to improve your life through your confidence, capabilities, and overall happiness. So let's just go ahead and jump right into the video. Coming in at number 1 is going to be always make sure that you have a positive attitude. Or if at least you are having a bad day, don't let the client see it. Trust me, we've all dealt with our fair share of managers that we don't like to be around, whether it was the one that treated everyone terribly, the one who was micromanaging and didn't trust you to do your work, or the one that was just completely hands-off and gave you no direction at all. When you are a consultant, you are constantly dealing with new things every single day, and you are at the general whim of the client. So while the client may want one thing from you at the beginning of the day, they may change their tune completely and want something else by the end of the day. When I first started, I found this workflow to be incredibly frustrating, and I would get into my head and get very frustrated to the point where people could visibly see that I was annoyed or upset. Now, there's nothing wrong with being frustrated, but the problem is when you exhibit that behavior, the client sees it, and the client might interpret it you as acting unprofessionally. And based on that, the client can decide many things. They may ask to replace you individually, or they might not even hire your company again based on how you acted. So it's important that you maintain a good attitude in front of the client. By learning to manage your frustration and your emotions and know the proper people to express them to, it's going to make your work and your life so much easier. All right, the next point is going to be super important, and that is going to be leave your ego at the door. I mean this on two fronts. You may have just graduated college and think that you know everything because you just went through a 4-year degree program. Just because you graduated does not mean that you know anything. There are a lot of people out there that know a lot more than you. And there are even going to be people out there that have not graduated with your typical 4-year degree that are going to know more than you simply because they have much more experience. Now, on the other front is you may know exactly what you're talking about, and you may be recommending the best course of action. That does not always mean that your client is going to want to pursue that course of action. A lot of times, clients have their own ideas of how they want things done, and it doesn't necessarily matter what you recommend. There will likely be several times where you make a recommendation to a client and they decide to go the complete opposite direction. Just know that it's nothing personal. A lot of people tend to get really frustrated or take offense when their recommendations aren't taken. But especially as a young consultant, you gotta be able to prove yourself and your knowledge. You'll also likely be put on teams that are from diverse backgrounds that will be able to offer many different perspectives. So you're not going to be the only person speaking in the room. By being humble and recognizing those things, people will see that from you, and they'll be able to know that you're someone that can be trusted to collaborate and get work done, even if it wasn't exactly your plan. Remember how I was talking about having a positive attitude? Well, if you have found the information in this video to be helpful or informative at all, please be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to join me in this self-improvement journey. It helps to grow the channel and helps the information to reach other people. Thank you so much, and now let's continue with the video. Coming in at point 3 is something I already talked about a little bit with the last point, but it's going to be that the customer is always right. So I already discussed how there's going to be several times where the customer is going to go against your recommendations, but that's not the only thing that is covered here. Depending on your situation that you're working in, the client might ask you to do things that you don't personally feel like falls within your scope. Now, if you are in a management position or you are someone who has complete control over their contract, you might be able to say, hey, no, sorry, that doesn't fall into my scope, or you might be able to negotiate something. But if you are under a manager at a consulting firm, then that conversation may look a little bit different. A lot of times I have found that it is best to listen to the client and listen to what they're saying, because a lot of times they are expressing actual problems that they have. And you just say, yes, okay, I'll see what I can do about that. And that's when you go to your personal manager. Now, your manager might say like, hey, no, that's not something that we're gonna do, so I'll have that conversation. But that is not a conversation for you to have as an entry-level consultant. Your job is to make the customer happy by helping them solve their problems. So if they're expressing that they would like something done, you say, yes, sir. And you let your project manager handle that if they feel like it is out of scope. I have another example where the customer is always right. As a consultant, you are typically labeled as a contractor, and unfortunately, contractors are typically at the bottom of the totem pole. That typically means you have very little say in the decision making, as well as you're likely going to be one of the last people that's going to be communicated with on certain decision making. This results in a lot of finger pointing, and despite you doing your best, sometimes the finger is going to be pointed at you for being the reason that a failure happened. It's important that through this you maintain that positive attitude that I was talking about, and you say, I understand and I won't do it next time. And again, if it's truly a situation where you're being blamed for something and you might get in trouble, that's when you bring your management into it and you let them handle that. Again, as a level 1 consultant, your job is to make the customer happy. So by treating it as they are always right and letting your personal management handle the conflicts, you are always going to be in good standing with the client. Speaking of being in good standing with the client, this next tip is going to be particularly helpful. And that is going to be make sure that you are taking initiative to get stuff done. This comes in on several fronts. First off, make sure that you're not being lazy with your work. Make sure that the client sees you working on your thing and they don't see you messing around on your phone or talking too much with your coworkers. In general, it's okay to have a little bit of chit chat, but you should not be regularly coming in late or leaving early because the client will see that. Make sure that you are taking actions to get your work done. A pretty common example that clients really like to see is if they ask you something that you are not knowledgeable on. You're going to run into this pretty often as a new consultant, as you are still learning the industry and learning new things. And this even happens with consultants that have been in the industry for a few years. So if a client asks you something that you don't know, what do? Do not respond with, I don't know. Say, that's not really my area of expertise. Let me find someone or talk to someone that might be able to get me the answer that you would like. By showing that you are willing to go and find the answer, even if you don't know it, the client will see you very positively. And I've had that personally work out for me several times. And finally, and arguably one of the biggest tips that I can give here is make sure that you are developing relationships with your team as well as your client. Getting to know your team will help you all to function together much more seamlessly and will help you to be on the same page. What's going to motivate anyone to stay late when the deadline is quickly approaching so that way the work can get done? Only a team that really cares and wants to be there for each other will do that sort of thing. Now, on the client side, get to know your client, get to know their hobbies, get to know their families a little bit outside of work. Because the closer that you get with your client, the better communication that you can have about your project. By getting to know your client a little bit better, they tend to think of you when other projects come up. So you may have made a really good impression on a client and finished a previous project, but now they've got some additional work. And because you took the time to build that relationship with them and get to know them, they think of you first. And they end up reaching out to you and your company to develop another project. And it was all because you took that extra little bit of time to get to know them. All right, so those are the tips. If you guys had any of your own thoughts or opinions on the matter, please be sure to let me know in the comments down below. I like to try and read them all. But at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I would give a few of my personal thoughts as to whether or not being a consultant would be good for you. Let me just say, if you are someone who likes to have a relatively relaxed job or you don't want to be challenged, this might not be the job for you. Consulting can be a very challenging job at times. Don't get me wrong, it's a lot of fun, but it can be extremely frustrating, as I mentioned earlier in the video. There are going to be times where you go weeks doing work and then it feels like all of it gets erased away. And you've got to be able to move seamlessly and flow with the project even when that happens. So if you're someone who tends to get really stressed and frustrated as deadlines and work starts kind of getting a little bit messy, this might not be for you because there tends to be a lot of growing pains with new consulting teams. Building relationships is a really big part of this job. If you're not someone who doesn't like to go up to people and talk to them and get to know them a bit, this might not be for you. If you're someone who likes to sit at their desk and be left alone to do their work, this might not be for you. There are going to be times where you need to talk to people just to get to know them and also get to know their pain points. And that's going to take time away from your personal work, but you need to be able to balance that. So someone who doesn't like to be interrupted and just continue working, this might not be the industry for you. I really recommend consulting for people who really like to get to know other people and talk to them, as well as solve people's problems, but can deal with a rapid and fast changing environment that can be relatively frustrating at times. But that's just my personal thoughts. And that's gonna bring us to the end of today's video. If you're interested in watching more of my videos where I talk about career-related content, be sure to check out this video right here, where I talk about the top 5 most underrated skills for you to develop in your career. If you're more interested in some of my most recent stuff, be sure to check out this video right here. But until the next time, this is the Mengineer, signing off.